This would be Paul Amendment 2. This amendment adds language to specify that no additional funds are authorized to be appropriated. I think it would be a great legislative exercise to try to figure out, as we make government bigger, where we'd shift the money from, how we'd pay for these things. So we have $100 billion out there. Certainly there'd be some money if you want to do something for the northern border. So if we really were concerned about the money, we would make some actual choices. Instead of saying we shouldn't have to choose, really, I think the legislative imperative should be we do have to choose. So for example, if we were looking for places to save money, if we thought the border was a priority, north and south, and the integrity of the country was a priority, environmental justice, $160 million. We could decide whether, anything to do with the environment has to do with justice and see if that's being well spent. We could look at the electric vehicles that DHS says they actually don't want. That was $123 million. The law since the 1960s has said the federal government can't and shouldn't discriminate. I completely agree with that. We should have no discrimination in government. And yet, and I thought we'd gotten way beyond that. You don't find many accusations of you do. When you do, you have a legitimate civil action if someone discriminates against you. But instead of acknowledging how far we've come, we've taken a step backwards where we have all of this money going into identifying people based on their race. Diversity Fellowship, $1.3 million. Diversity Program Evaluation, $800,000. Diversity Inclusion Training, $700,000. Study of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Fire Services, $183,000. Diversity, Equity, Inclusion in the Fire Service, another $160,000. Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Working Group, $56,000. So, it goes on and on the list. I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars. And the thing is I think our job as legislators should be to determine, if the things before us in these bills are important, why don't we not spend it somewhere that's less important? Why don't we have a debate? I think there's not a person on either side that doesn't agree there should be no discrimination, that the government should be colorblind. I think we have for a long time. I mean, the worst example that I can think of is probably back with Woodrow Wilson, deciding to no longer have individuals hired who were African American back in the teens. But we've come a long way since then. I think we do a pretty good job, and we should continue to be vigilant. But the idea of identifying people based on their race is actually the reverse. The Supreme Court's now looked into this and sort of acknowledged that we're at a time in our history when we should quit categorizing people by race, quit separating people out by race, and just say, hey, you're an individual. You do a good job, you continue to work. You don't do a good job, you're judged by your merit, not your ethnicity. So anyway, there's a lot of areas here where we could be cutting, but my amendment simply says that no additional funds are authorized, and then what would have to happen is whoever's in charge of actually spending the money at the Department of Homeland Security could look at all these programs, electric vehicles, climate adaptation office, all this stuff that's going on that really does nothing to do with our border, and decide whether it would be better spent on the border. So my amendment would require this prioritization of funding, and it would require people to actually make the difficult decisions, which is what really happens at the state government level and the county government level. Because they have a finite budget, they make decisions. Because we have a budget that seems to have no limit because we have a printing press, we just simply say, oh, this is a great idea, and everybody gets together and says, oh, yeah, it's great. Now it's a bipartisan idea. But nobody seems to care where the money's coming from. So most of these bills aren't scored, so we have no idea how much they cost. But this amendment would simply say no additional funds are authorized to be appropriated. It wouldn't stop the bill, just say the bill has to be implemented with the existing funds.
This amendment could prevent the DHS from implementing key requirements of this bill to improve the security of our northern border. I would urge my colleagues to vote no. Seeing no other debate, the clerk will call the roll.
Senator Carper.
No by proxy.
Senator Hassan. No. Senator Sinema. No. Senator Rosen. No. Senator Padilla. No. Senator Ossoff. No. Senator Lumenthal. No. Senator Paul.
Aye.
Senator Johnson.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Lankford.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Romney.
Aye.
Senator Scott.
Aye.
Senator Hawley.
Aye.
Senator Marshall.
No.
Senator Peters.
No.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 4, the nays are 8. On the vote by proxy, the yeas are 2, the nays are 1. In this vote, the yeas are 6, the nays are 9, and the amendment is not agreed to.
The amendment is not agreed to. Does any other senator wish to offer an amendment? Senator Paul.
This is Paul, Amendment 3. It would add a 2-year sunset to this bill. This would allow us to determine whether this works, you know. Great ideas are great ideas, but then we should reevaluate them in practice and find out if they worked. So this Northern Border Coordination Center, it's a great idea. In 2 years, we'd come back, we'd have a hearing, we'd bring in the head of the Northern Border Coordination Center, and we'd ask them questions. We might bring in opponents who say it's not working. We might bring in supporters who say it's working and we should double the budget for this. We spend $10 million, we should spend $20 million. And then we would make sort of this legislative assessment of whether or not, well, gosh, if this is a really great idea and it's working and illegal border crossings have gone down and we look at the statistics, then maybe we'd say, well, maybe we don't need, $160 million for environmental justice. Maybe we could do $150 million for environmental justice and switch over $10 million to this. But these are the kind of discussions we're not having because we don't sunset anything, we don't have any limitations on the money, and we basically act as if there is no fiscal limit to anything we do. Now, you might say these aren't that much money. Maybe they're not. Most of them aren't scored, so we don't really know. But the thing is that this is what should happen in all of government. So anyway, my amendment would add a 2-year sunset to this so we can then reconsider either it's a great idea, not so great idea, but we could decide then how to fund it again in 2 years.
This amendment would basically prevent